"There's a door behind the mirror," the girl whispered, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and wonder. The man moved the mirror aside and froze. What he discovered in that moment would forever alter the course of his life. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The sunlight over Savannah was thick and golden that afternoon, painting long shadows across the ancient parquet flooring of the Carter mansion. The summer heat had settled into the walls, making the air inside heavy with the scent of old wood. And history. Amelia Carter, a curious child with bright eyes that missed nothing, tiptoed carefully up the creaking staircase to the second floor. Something had been bothering her for days. The ornate mirror at the end of the upstairs hallway simply didn't match the faded floral wallpaper surrounding it. Unlike the other antiques that seemed to belong, this mirror felt wrong, out of place, like it was hiding something. Daniel Carter followed his niece up the stairs, his scientific mind already cataloguing the architectural inconsistencies of the old house they'd inherited just 3 weeks ago. As a scientist accustomed to laboratory precision, the mansion's quirks both fascinated and unsettled him. "Uncle Daniel," Amelia whispered, tugging urgently at his sleeve. Her small fingers gripped the fabric with surprising strength. "I need to show you something." He knelt beside her, noting how her eyes darted nervously toward the mirror. "What is it, Amelia?" "There's a door behind the mirror, Uncle. I saw it move." Her voice trembled, barely audible even in the silence of the corridor. "Yesterday, when I was playing, the whole thing shifted when I leaned against the wall." Daniel hesitated, studying her expression for signs of an overactive imagination. Yet Amelia had never been one for tall tales. She was observant, thoughtful, much like her mother Lucy. "Are you certain?" he asked gently. She nodded emphatically. "I'm positive. There was a draft, too, cold air coming from behind it." A chill ran down Daniel's spine that had nothing to do with the mansion's erratic air conditioning. He approached the mirror cautiously, examining its ornate wooden frame. The craftsmanship was exquisite. Carved roses and vines encircled the glass, which reflected their uncertain faces back at them. Taking a deep breath, Daniel pressed his palm against the cool surface of the frame. Something clicked beneath his touch. With careful pressure, he slid the entire fixture sideways, revealing a thin seam in the plaster wall behind it. His heart pounded against his ribs as ancient hinges groaned in protest. Amelia clutched his arm tightly, half hiding behind him, yet unable to look away. The mirror continued sliding, revealing what was unmistakably the edge of a doorway that, according to the mansion's blueprints, should not exist. A metallic groan echoed through the silent corridor as the mirror shifted beneath Daniel Carter's trembling fingers. The ornate frame, once firmly affixed to the wall, gave way with surprising ease, revealing a seam in the plaster, the unmistakable outline of a door, untouched for generations. The scientist in him immediately catalogued the possibilities, a forgotten storage space perhaps, or an architectural quirk common to old Savannah mansions. "Uncle Daniel, look," Amelia whispered, her small hand clutching his sleeve tighter. Daniel's rational mind warred with the prickling sensation crawling up his spine. The mansion had stood since before the Civil War, its walls undoubtedly harboring countless secrets. Yet something about this particular discovery felt different, forbidden even. His scientific training urged caution, but curiosity ultimately won the internal battle. He traced the edge of the revealed doorway with his fingertips, surprised by the cold that seemed to seep from within. "It's freezing," he murmured, more to himself than to his niece. The gap between mirror and wall widened as Daniel applied gentle pressure, revealing more of the hidden entrance. Decades of dust had sealed the edges, creating a soft popping sound as the ancient barrier surrendered to modern intrusion. Amelia stood transfixed, her eyes wide with a mixture of apprehension and excitement. Her pulse raced visibly at her. throat as a sudden draught rushed from the gap, carrying the faintest scent of cedar and something older, almost sorrowful, like forgotten memories given physical form. "Do you smell that?" she asked, her voice barely audible. Daniel nodded, inhaling deeply. Beyond the expected mustiness lay something distinctive, perhaps old perfume or preserved wood. The scientist in him wanted to analyze it. The protective uncle worried what it might signify. The late afternoon sunlight streamed through the mansion's tall windows, painting the corridor in golden hues that contrasted sharply with the absolute darkness behind the partially opened door. Shadows stretched across the antique parquet flooring, elongating as the sun continued its descent. Uncle and niece exchanged a meaningful glance. Fear and wonder mingled in the golden dusk. Neither spoke, but both understood the threshold moment they faced. Whatever lay beyond that door had remained hidden for decades, perhaps centuries, concealed for reasons unknown. "Should we?" Amelia whispered, her courage wavering slightly. Daniel squeezed her shoulder reassuringly, though his own heart hammered against his ribs. "Together," he replied, his scientific curiosity finally overcoming his apprehension. "On three." The air in the hidden room hung still, as if time itself had been sealed away for decades. Daniel Carter stepped cautiously. Across the threshold, his scientific mind cataloguing details, even as goosebumps rose on his arms. Dust motes danced in the slanted beams of afternoon light, filtering through a crack in the wall, the room's only connection to the outside world. "Uncle Daniel, look!" Amelia whispered, her voice barely disturbing the silence. The cramped space measured no more than 8 feet square, with peeling wallpaper revealing layers of history beneath. In the center stood a warped wooden table, its surface scarred by time. Upon it lay a child's diary, its leather cover cracked and faded, the year 1924 still visible in faded gold lettering. Beside it, a collection of hand-painted ceramic toys were arranged in an eerily deliberate semicircle, a miniature tea party frozen in time. "Don't touch anything yet," Daniel cautioned. His researcher's instincts taking over, he pulled his smartphone from his pocket, documenting everything before they disturbed the scene. Amelia nodded, but couldn't tear her eyes from the diary. Her small fingers hovered inches above its cover, trembling slightly. The ceramic dolls seemed to watch her with their painted eyes, their once bright colors dulled by nearly a century of darkness. Despite their faded appearance, there was something unnervingly lifelike about their expressions, a silent plea captured in porcelain. "These belong to children," she murmured, her intuition sharp as always. Daniel moved carefully around the perimeter, noting a small cot pushed against the far wall, its thin mattress disintegrated into dust and fabric scraps. A child-sized dress hung from a nail, preserved in the dry air, its pattern still visible despite the yellowing fabric. The floorboards creaked beneath his weight, each sound amplified in the stillness. The scientist flinched at a sudden scurrying in the corner. "Just mice," he told himself, though his heart raced. The air felt thick with secrets, heavy with unspoken stories. "Someone lived here," Daniel said, examining scratch marks on the inside of the door. "And they couldn't get out." Amelia's eyes widened as she processed his words. "A child?" she asked, her voice small. Daniel nodded grimly. "I think so. And they were hidden here for a reason." The silence pressed in around them, as if the very walls were listening. Decades of isolation seemed to have preserved not just objects but emotions, fear, loneliness, and something else Daniel couldn't quite name. He placed a protective hand on his niece's shoulder as they both realized the magnitude of what they'd discovered. "We need to know who they were," Amelia said with unexpected resolve. Word of their discovery spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. By noon the next day, Daniel Carter found himself fielding curious glances from neighbors passing by the mansion's wrought-iron gates. Some slowed their vehicles, craning necks to catch a glimpse of the historic home that suddenly held new mysteries. "I've called in some help," Daniel told Amelia as they ate lunch. "A restoration expert from the university. Professor Malcolm Hughes arrived precisely at 2 o'clock, his sedan packed with equipment. The professor was a tall man with spectacles that kept sliding down his nose, his enthusiasm evident in the rapid-fire questions he asked while unloading his gear. "Fascinating structure," Malcolm remarked, gazing up at the mansion's facade. "Pre-Civil War architecture with Victorian modifications. The perfect place to hide secrets." Daniel led the professor upstairs, explaining their discovery, while Amelia trailed behind them, watching Malcolm's every move with cautious curiosity. "Children often sense things we adults miss," Malcolm said, smiling at the girl. "Your niece has quite the intuition." The hidden room fell silent as Malcolm worked methodically, scanning walls with thermal imaging devices and examining every inch with specialized lights. His tools revealed what naked eyes could not: faint handprints on the walls, areas where the plaster differed in composition. "Look here," the professor called, kneeling by the baseboard in the corner. He ran his fingers along the dusty wood, revealing shallow carvings, names, dates. Daniel crouched beside him, squinting at the faded markings. Elizabeth 1922, Thomas 1923. "Children's names, perhaps?" Malcolm suggested, his voice hushed with reverence. Amelia pointed to another marking, partially hidden beneath decades of dust. "What does that say?" Malcolm cleaned the area gently with a soft brush. A single word emerged: "Stay." The air in the room seemed to grow colder. Daniel felt a chill race up his spine, his scientific mind struggling to rationalize the unease settling in his stomach. "Someone wanted these children to remain hidden," Malcolm whispered, his academic detachment momentarily broken. "Question is, hidden from what? Or whom?" Daniel glanced at his niece, who was tracing the carved names with her small fingers. His logical resolve, the foundation of his scientific career, wavered as he contemplated the implications. These weren't just historical artifacts. They were evidence of lives, of children who might have suffered in this very space. "We need to document everything," he said finally, his voice steadier than he felt. "Whatever happened here deserves to be known." Malcolm nodded, already photographing the inscriptions. "History isn't always pleasant, but it always demands truth." July brought Savannah's famous St. Patrick's Day festivities, transforming the historic district into a sea of emerald and gold. The cobblestone streets pulsed with music and laughter, a stark contrast to the heavy silence that had settled over the Carter mansion since their discovery. Daniel Carter moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his scientific mind cataloguing details even as he tried to enjoy the celebration. The parade wound its way down Bull Street, bagpipes wailing and dancers twirling. Daniel paused near a vendor selling green cotton candy when a conversation caught his attention. Two elderly men in tweed jackets stood nearby, their voices barely audible over the festivities. "That's the scientist who bought the old Abernathy place," one whispered, nodding in Daniel's direction. "The house with the missing children." Daniel's stomach tightened. He pretended to watch a float pass by while straining to hear more. "Some secrets should stay buried," the second man replied, "especially in that house." They moved on before Daniel could approach them, disappearing into the crowd like ghosts. The cotton candy turned sour in his mouth as questions multiplied in his mind. Back at the mansion, Lucy had organized a small gathering for neighbors, hoping to ease tensions that had been building since the discovery behind the mirror. She moved among their guests with forced cheerfulness, her eyes constantly finding her daughter in the crowd. Amelia had spent the evening with Caleb Freeman, the young apprentice restorer who had been assisting Malcolm Hughes with the documentation of their find. The two had formed an immediate connection, bonded by curiosity and the thrill of discovery. Now they danced awkwardly in the corner of the ballroom, Amelia's laughter cutting through the tension like sunshine through storm clouds. "She seems happy," Malcolm observed, joining Daniel by the refreshment table. The professor's enthusiasm for their project remained undimmed, though shadows under his eyes betrayed late nights spent researching. Daniel nodded, watching his niece. For now, an elderly woman Daniel recognized as Mrs. Thornton, whose family had lived in Savannah for generations, approached them with a glass of punch trembling in her hand. "You should be careful with that house," she said without preamble. "Margaret Abernathy wasn't just a wealthy eccentric. She took in children no one wanted, orphans, runaways. But not all of them left. Some say they're still there, behind the walls." Daniel felt a chill despite the warm evening. What happened to them? Mrs. Thornton's eyes darted toward Tobias Green, who stood watching them from across the room. "No one knows for certain, but the stories, half legend, half warning, they all end the same way. Those children vanished without a trace, and no one ever looked for them. No one except Margaret." The grandfather clock in the hallway struck midnight as Daniel Carter and Amelia returned to the mansion, their minds still buzzing with the parade's festivities and the unsettling whispers they'd overheard. The scientist's rational mind struggled to process the rumors about missing children, yet something about those stories resonated with a deeper, more primal fear. "Uncle Daniel, can we check the room again?" Amelia asked, her voice barely audible in the stillness of the house. Daniel hesitated, then nodded. Just a quick look, then bed. They crept up the ancient staircase, floorboards creaking beneath their weight. The mirror gleamed in the moonlight, filtering through lace curtains, its ornate frame casting twisted shadows across the faded wallpaper. Daniel switched on a small flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness as they approached the hidden entrance. Suddenly, a faint metallic clatter echoed from behind the mirror. Amelia froze mid-step, her breath becoming shallow and quick. Daniel instinctively pulled his niece close, wrapping them both in a cotton throw that had been draped over a nearby chair. The familiar scent of cedar from the hidden room mingled with their fear, making the air thick and difficult to breathe. "What was that?" Amelia whispered, her fingers digging into her uncle's arm. "Probably just the house settling," he replied, though his scientific mind knew better. Old houses made noise, yes, but that sound had been deliberate, like metal scraping against metal. They waited in tense silence, every nerve on edge. Daniel could feel Amelia's heart racing against his side as they stared at the mirror, half expecting to see something or someone staring back. Minutes stretched like hours in the oppressive quiet. Then a tiny brown mouse darted from behind the mirror and scurried across the floorboards, its tiny claws scratching against the wood. In its panicked flight, the rodent scattered several brittle sheets of yellowed paper that had been hidden beneath the edge of an antique rug. Relief washed over them, followed quickly by curiosity. As Daniel collected the scattered papers, Amelia knelt beside a particular floorboard where the mouse had emerged. "Uncle Daniel, look at this," she called, her finger tracing over something. In the wood, Daniel shifted the flashlight beam. There, carved deeply into the aged oak, was a name that seemed to have been etched with desperate purpose. Margaret Abernathy. "Who's Margaret Abernathy?" Amelia asked, looking up at her uncle. With wide eyes, Daniel shook his head slowly. "I don't know," he answered truthfully, "but I think she's trying to tell us something." The ancient blueprints lay spread across the dining room table, their edges curling with age. Professor Malcolm Hughes traced his finger along the faded lines, his restoration expertise proving invaluable. Daniel Carter watched intently, his scientific mind cataloguing every detail as they searched for answers about the hidden room. "There," Malcolm pointed to a peculiar mark on the blueprint. "This doesn't match the current layout. There might be a mechanism." Daniel nodded, his thoughts racing. After 3 days of meticulous examination, they returned to the hidden room with renewed purpose. Lifting the corner of an antique Persian rug, the scientist discovered what they'd been searching for, a small brass lever flush with the floorboards, tarnished by decades of secrecy. "Should I?" Daniel asked, glancing at Malcolm. The professor adjusted his glasses. History waits for no one. With a deep breath, Daniel pressed the lever. A mechanical click resonated through the walls, followed by the grinding of long dormant gears. The ornate mirror that had concealed the initial room began to rotate on a central axis, the movement slow and deliberate, like stone grinding against stone. The sound echoed through the mansion, a century of silence finally broken. As the mirror completed its rotation, it revealed what had been hidden beyond, a narrow stone staircase descending into impenetrable darkness. The air that rushed up from below carried the musty scent of forgotten spaces and untold stories. "We need to tell Lucy," Malcolm whispered, but curiosity had already claimed them both. Daniel retrieved a flashlight from his pocket, its beam cutting through the darkness like a knife. "I'll go first," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. Amelia, who had been watching from the doorway, stepped forward. In her hands, she clutched a porcelain doll she had found earlier on the dresser. The doll's face was beautiful, yet unsettling, delicate features marred by a crack running across its painted lips. "I want to come too, Uncle Daniel," she said, her young voice determined, despite the fear evident in her eyes. Daniel hesitated at the top of the stairs, torn between protection and inclusion. "Stay close behind me, then." Amelia nodded, but as she approached the staircase, she froze. The porcelain doll in her hands suddenly felt heavier, colder. She looked down at its cracked face, and for a moment she could have sworn the painted lips moved, forming words that seemed to whisper directly into her mind. "Don't leave me alone." A violent shiver ran down Amelia's spine, and she nearly dropped the doll. Instead, she clutched it tighter, unable to explain why she couldn't bring herself to leave it behind as they prepared to descend into the unknown depths of the Carter mansion. Daniel Carter held the lantern high as he and Amelia descended the stone staircase. The light flickered across the damp walls, casting dancing shadows that seemed to reach for them with spectral fingers. The air grew colder with each step, carrying the musty scent of decades-old secrets. "Stay close," Daniel whispered, his scientific mind struggling to process what they were discovering. His niece nodded, her small hand gripping his sleeve as they reached the bottom. Before them stretched a narrow corridor, its walls adorned with faded murals that time had nearly erased. The scientist moved the light closer, revealing scenes of children at play, jumping rope, playing tag, building sandcastles. But something was wrong with their faces. What once might have been joyful expressions had deteriorated into smudged, hollow-eyed stares that seemed to follow their movements. "Uncle Daniel," Amelia whispered. "They look sad, like they're watching us." He squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. Though he couldn't shake the sensation of being observed, the painted children's eyes held an accusatory quality, as if demanding answers for some long-forgotten injustice. "It's just old paint, sweetheart," he said, not entirely convinced himself. They continued down the corridor, the temperature dropping with each step. Malcolm had theorized these passages might connect to other historic houses in Savannah, perhaps part of an underground network from Prohibition times. But this felt older, more purposeful than mere smuggling tunnels. At the corridor's end sat a small wooden table with an antique radio. Its bakelite casing was cracked, the dial yellowed with age. Daniel set down the lantern and examined the device, surprised to find it still had wires connected to what appeared to be a power source, embedded in the wall. "I wonder if it still works," he murmured, turning the knob. To their astonishment, the radio crackled to life. Static hissed through the speaker, then cleared momentarily as a voice emerged, tinny and distant like a broadcast from another time. "We interrupt this program with a special bulletin. Police are investigating the disappearance of 3 more children last seen at Abernathy House, summer of 1924. Citizens are advised to—" The voice dissolved back into static, then silence. Amelia's face had gone pale. "Uncle Daniel, that sounded real." The scientist stared at the radio, his rational mind racing for explanations. Sound waves trapped in the walls? Some kind of recording? Or something he couldn't yet understand? "I think," he said slowly, "we need to find out who Margaret Abernathy was." The words hung in the frigid air as the painted children watched from the walls, their hollow eyes seeming to whisper, "Finally, someone hears us." Amelia Carter tossed in her bed, tangled in cotton sheets damp with sweat. For the third night in a row, her dreams were invaded by a pale child with hollow eyes who spoke in desperate whispers. "Find the others," the spectral figure pleaded, floating just beyond reach. "They're still waiting, still hidden." The young girl bolted upright at 3 a.m, her heart hammering against her ribs. Moonlight spilled through the curtains, casting long shadows across her bedroom floor. Something drew her gaze to the antique vanity mirror, a family heirloom that had always given her an uneasy feeling. Amelia's breath caught in her throat as she stared at her reflection. For a terrifying moment, her features seemed to blur and shift, melting into someone else's face, a child with sunken cheeks and pleading eyes that didn't belong to her. "Help us," the reflection mouthed silently. Trembling, she scrambled out of bed and raced down the hallway, her bare feet silent against the worn carpet. She found her uncle in the study, hunched over Margaret Abernathy's diary, the pages illuminated by flickering candlelight. Daniel hadn't slept properly since they'd discovered the hidden room. "Uncle Daniel," she whispered, her voice cracking, "I saw someone in my mirror." The scientist looked up, dark circles under his eyes betraying his exhaustion. He opened his arms, and his niece rushed into them, seeking comfort in his familiar embrace. "I've been reading Margaret's entries," Daniel said softly, stroking Amelia's hair. "This house wasn't just a mansion. It was an orphanage, a secret one." He turned the brittle pages carefully, revealing elegant handwriting that documented names, dates, and brief descriptions. Margaret took in children nobody wanted, gave them shelter here behind the mirror. But listen to this entry from August 1924. "Thomas left today. The official record will show adoption. But I fear what truly happened. That makes 7 children who have found homes but never sent letters. God forgive me for my silence." Amelia shivered despite the summer heat. "The children in my dreams, they're trying to tell me something about what happened to them." Daniel nodded gravely. Margaret's later entries grow increasingly paranoid. She mentions powerful men and arrangements she couldn't stop. "I think she was trying to protect the children, but something went terribly wrong." The uncle and niece sat together in the pool of candlelight, surrounded by shadows that seemed to watch and listen. Outside, the ancient oaks of Savannah whispered in the night breeze, as if they too remembered the lost children whose stories had been buried for nearly a century. "We need to find out what happened to them," Amelia said with determination, beyond her years. "They're asking for our help." Daniel stared at the diary's yellowed pages, his fingers trembling slightly as memories from his own childhood surfaced like ghosts. The quiet loneliness of growing up with a missing piece, his twin brother who vanished without explanation when they were just 7. No body found, no closure, just the hollow ache that never truly healed. "Thomas," he whispered, the name feeling foreign on his tongue after years of forced silence. Margaret Abernathy's handwriting blurred before his eyes as he read her desperate confessions. The woman had established a secret orphanage within these walls, taking in children nobody wanted, children who might not be missed. Her intentions seemed pure at first, protection, shelter, love, but the diary took a darker turn. Some children went missing under circumstances she described as beyond my control. Was she complicit or another victim? The scientist in Daniel demanded evidence, but the weight of these parallels to his own loss crushed his analytical resolve. He closed the diary and pressed his palms against his eyes. The rational part of his mind still fought against accepting supernatural explanations, yet the mounting evidence was becoming harder to dismiss. The carved names, the hidden rooms, the whispers Amelia claimed to hear, They formed a pattern too consistent to ignore. That evening, Daniel drove to his sister's apartment across town. Lucy Carter opened the door, her expression shifting, from surprise to concern when she saw his haggard face. "You look terrible," she said, ushering him inside. In her small living room, surrounded by family photos, many featuring Amelia's beaming face, Daniel finally confided everything they'd discovered. The hidden room, Margaret's diary, the missing children from nearly a century ago. Lucy listened, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles whitening as the story unfolded. "This has to stop," she finally said, voice tight with fear. "I want Amelia out of that house, now." "Lucy, we're uncovering something important." "I don't care." Her protective instinct flared. "My daughter is having nightmares. She's talking to people who aren't there. This isn't some scientific experiment, Daniel. This is my child's safety and sanity." Daniel fell silent, recognizing the same fierce protection their parents had shown after Thomas disappeared, the desperate need to shield the remaining child from further harm. "1 week," he negotiated. "Give me 1 week to document everything properly. Then I'll bring Amelia here if you want." Lucy's eyes narrowed, torn between trust in her brother and fear for her daughter. 3 days, she counted, not 1 hour more. Malcolm Hughes stood transfixed before the dusty bookshelf, his restoration equipment scattered at his feet. The professor's methodical approach had paid off. After carefully removing several leather-bound volumes, he discovered a section of wall that didn't match the others. His experienced fingers detected the slightest difference in texture, and with gentle pressure, the panel swung open. "Daniel, you need to see this," Malcolm called, his voice echoing through the hidden room. Daniel Carter rushed over, his scientific curiosity piqued. Before them, a mural-sized map spread across the wall, its faded ink still visible despite decades of darkness. The intricate drawing revealed an elaborate network of tunnels connecting several historic Savannah houses, including the Carter Mansion. "This must have been constructed during Prohibition," the professor explained, tracing the paths with his finger. "Smugglers would have used these passages to transport alcohol without detection." Daniel nodded, his mind racing with possibilities. These tunnels could explain how children disappeared without a trace. They might have been moved through this network. Meanwhile, Caleb Freeman had been listening intently from the doorway. The young apprentice restorer had grown increasingly fascinated by the mansion's mysteries and by Amelia. That evening, after everyone had gone to bed, Caleb returned with a small lantern, determined to explore one of the tunnel entrances he'd spotted on the map. He slipped into the passage behind the kitchen pantry, heart pounding with excitement. The air was thick with history and decay. Caleb had ventured only 20 yards when a beam of light caught him by surprise. "Freeman, what in God's name are you doing here?" His boss, the head of the restoration company, stood blocking his path, face contorted with anger. The next morning, Amelia found Caleb sitting dejectedly on the mansion's front steps. "I've been fired," he confessed, eyes downcast. "My boss said I was trespassing and violating preservation protocols." Amelia sat beside him, her small hand finding his. "I'm sorry. This is all because of us, isn't it?" Caleb shook his head. "No regrets. Some things are more important than a job." Over the following days, despite his unemployment, Caleb continued to help Amelia piece together the mansion's mysteries. They spent hours comparing the tunnel map to old city records, identifying potential entry points and matching them with historical accounts of missing children. "Look at this," Amelia whispered one afternoon, pointing to a newspaper clipping. 3 orphans vanished the same week in 1924. Their shared pursuit forged a bond between them that transcended their age difference. In each other, they found something precious. Amelia gained a confidant who believed her experiences without question, while Caleb discovered a courage he hadn't known he possessed. The sky above Savannah cracked open with fury, unleashing sheets of rain that pummeled the Carter Mansion, Daniel Carter stood transfixed before the ornate mirror as lightning illuminated the hallway in harsh, electric bursts. What began as a typical summer storm had morphed into something more unsettling when the mirror began to tremble against the wall, not from the thunder but seemingly of its own accord. "Uncle Daniel, look!" Amelia's voice barely carried over. The storm's roar. She pointed with a shaking finger as a frigid breeze sliced through the corridor, carrying the scent of damp earth and something older, more foreboding. The scientist reached for the hidden lever they'd discovered days earlier, his rational mind searching for mechanical explanations, even as goosebumps rose on his arms. As his fingers found the mechanism beneath the antique rug, he applied pressure, expecting the familiar stone-like rotation. Instead, the lever gave a sickening crack, seizing halfway through its motion. The sudden stop wrenched Daniel's wrist at an unnatural angle, trapping his hand in the mechanism. "I can't move it!" he gasped, pain shooting up his arm as he struggled to free himself. Amelia rushed to his side, her small hands trying to help pry the lever loose. Between flashes of lightning, the child noticed something peculiar about the wallpaper adjacent to the mirror. While the rest of the corridor featured yellowing paper affixed with ancient glue, this section was different. "Uncle, look at this," she whispered, momentarily distracted from Daniel's predicament. "The wallpaper here is stapled, not glued like the rest." Daniel, finally wrenching his hand free with a groan, cradled his throbbing wrist against his chest. He squinted through the darkness at his niece's discovery. Carefully, Amelia peeled back a corner of the paper, revealing yet another seam in the plaster, the outline of what could only be another doorway. "My God," Daniel breathed, momentarily forgetting his injury. "It's not just one hidden room." A tremendous boom of thunder shook the mansion to its foundations, and in that moment of illumination they both saw it, the faint outlines of seams running along multiple walls, ceiling to floor, some almost invisible unless caught in the perfect angle of light. "The entire house is a puzzle box," Amelia whispered, her eyes wide with equal parts wonder and fear. Daniel nodded slowly, realizing the magnitude of Margaret Abernathy's secret. "Not just a room or a passage," he said. "The mansion is a labyrinth." As lightning flashed again, the mirror gave another shudder, as if acknowledging their discovery. The storm raged on, but now they understood. They had barely scratched the surface of the mansion's dark history. Lucy Carter stood at the threshold of Amelia's bedroom, her heart sinking as she listened to her daughter's animated whispers. The soft glow of the nightlight cast eerie shadows across the walls, making the familiar room seem suddenly foreign and threatening. "I know they're scared," Amelia murmured to the empty corner, "but we're going to help them, Margaret. I promised." Lucy's fingers tightened around the doorframe. This wasn't the innocent imaginary friend phase she'd expected would pass. The name Margaret, the same Margaret Abernathy from the diary, sent ice through her veins. Her maternal instincts screamed that something was terribly wrong with the mansion, with this obsession Daniel had encouraged. Later that night, Lucy confronted her brother in the kitchen. "She's talking to ghosts, Daniel. Not pretend friends. She knows details about Margaret that weren't in that diary." Daniel looked up from his notes, exhaustion lining his face. "Children are perceptive. She probably overheard." "Don't!" Lucy slammed her palm on the counter. "Don't dismiss this. I'm considering taking her to my friend's lake house until this, whatever this is, blows over." The scientist's expression softened. "I would never let anything happen to her. You know that." "Do I?" Her voice cracked. "Your curiosity has always outweighed your caution." Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell's chime. Through the stained glass, they recognized the imposing silhouette of Tobias Green, the elderly patriarch of Savannah's oldest. Family stood rigid in the foyer, his cane tapping impatiently against the hardwood floor. "Carter," he addressed Daniel without pleasantries, "your excavations need to stop." "This is my property, Mr. Green," Daniel replied evenly. Tobias's eyes narrowed. This town has history that deserves respect. Some stories are best left untold for everyone's sake. His gaze drifted meaningfully toward the stairs where Amelia had appeared, watching silently. "Are you threatening us?" Lucy stepped forward, maternal protectiveness overriding her fear. The old man smiled thinly. "Merely offering wisdom. Ask yourself why these walls were sealed in the first place." He turned to leave, pausing at the door. "Your family is new to Savannah. Mine has been here for 7 generations. We understand the cost of disruption." After he left, Lucy turned to her brother, torn between flight and fight. "Maybe he's right. Maybe we should stop." Daniel looked at his niece on the stairs, then back at his sister. "Or maybe that's exactly why we need to continue." Daniel Carter hunched over a stack of yellow documents in the Savannah Public Records Office, his eyes burning from hours of scrutiny. The orphanage files he'd requested showed unmistakable signs of tampering. Entire years missing, names carefully erased, and pages suspiciously water-damaged in just the right places. "Someone went to great lengths to hide this," he muttered. To Malcolm Hughes, who stood examining microfiche records nearby. "The Greens have had people on the city council for generations," Malcolm replied, his voice low. Tobias's grandfather was particularly influential during the 20s and 30s. When Daniel applied for permits to officially document the hidden rooms and tunnels, the bureaucracy became an impenetrable wall. Applications were lost, inspections repeatedly postponed, and veiled threats about historical preservation violations arrived in official-looking envelopes. Lucy called him that evening, her voice tight with concern. "The school principal pulled me aside today. She said Amelia's been telling stories that are disturbing the other children. They're suggesting counseling." Daniel pinched the bridge of his nose. "It's not just the school. I received a letter from the Historical Society threatening to revoke our property's landmark status if we continue making unauthorized modifications." The pressure mounted when 3 different journalists appeared at their door within 24 hours. The first, from the Savannah Morning News, seemed genuinely interested in historical accuracy. The other 2, from tabloid-style websites, asked leading questions about ghost children and cursed mansions. That night Daniel sat alone, in the kitchen, spreadsheets of evidence before him, weighing impossible choices. Exposing the truth would mean confronting the most powerful family in Savannah, risking their home, Lucy's teaching position, and potentially subjecting Amelia to public scrutiny. The scientist in him demanded truth. The protector in him feared the consequences. His smartphone buzzed with a text from Caleb. "Found something in the Green family archives at work. Need to show you tomorrow." As he stared at the message, Daniel heard soft footsteps. Amelia stood in the doorway, clutching the porcelain doll she'd found weeks ago. "The children in my dreams said they don't want to be forgotten again," she whispered. "They said Margaret tried to tell people before, but nobody listened." Daniel looked at his niece, so small, yet carrying such a burden, and made his decision. Some truths couldn't remain buried, no matter the cost. "We won't let them be forgotten," he promised, pulling her into a hug. "But we need to be smart about how we do this." Outside, a car slowed as it passed the house, its headlights briefly illuminating the ancient oak trees that had witnessed a century of Savannah's secrets. The crisp autumn air swept through Savannah, bringing change to the Carter mansion. What was once a musty corridor now breathed with renewed life, the stale scent replaced by delicate jasmine wafting from the restored ballroom. Daniel Carter stood at the entrance, surveying the transformation with quiet satisfaction. The scientist had spent weeks preparing for this evening, hoping to heal old wounds through art and community. "Do you think people will actually come?" Amelia tugged at her uncle's sleeve, her eyes reflecting both hope and doubt. "They will," Daniel assured her, though uncertainty lingered in his voice. The discovery of the hidden room had divided the neighborhood. Some embraced the truth, while others, particularly the Green family, remained hostile to excavating the past. As twilight descended, guests began arriving for the Mardi Gras-inspired art night. Lucy greeted them at the door, her protective instincts momentarily eased by the festive atmosphere. She had finally made peace with Daniel's mission, recognizing that confronting the mansion's secrets might be the only way to truly heal. "The masks were a brilliant idea," Malcolm Hughes commented, adjusting his own elaborate feathered creation. The restoration expert had become a fixture in the house, his passion for historical preservation now tempered with respect for the human stories behind the artifacts. Beneath colorful disguises, old tensions mingled with new possibilities. Even Tobias Green made an appearance, his stern face hidden behind a simple black mask. The patriarch stood at the periphery, watchful but no longer openly antagonistic. In the hidden room, now transformed into a memorial space, local artists worked on collaborative pieces inspired by Savannah's rich and complex history. Daniel had carefully curated the event, inviting creators who understood the delicate balance between honoring the past and healing from it. Caleb Freeman, reinstated as an apprentice through Malcolm's intervention, guided visitors through the space. The young man had grown more confident in recent weeks, his bond with Amelia strengthening through their shared experiences. "Look," Amelia whispered to her friend, pointing to a corner where two elderly sisters, longtime residents who had initially shunned the Carters, were now adding brushstrokes to a mural depicting children playing in a garden. Daniel watched his niece's face illuminate with genuine joy for the first time in months. The weight of discovery had been heavy on her young shoulders, but tonight, surrounded by creativity and cautious reconciliation, she seemed lighter. As music and laughter filled the once silent corridors, Daniel caught Lucy's eye across the room. His sister nodded slightly, acknowledging that perhaps this painful journey had been necessary after all. Beneath the masks and festivities, something profound was happening. The beginning of healing, not just for the Carter family, but for all who had been touched by the mansion's long-buried secrets. The autumn sun cast long shadows through the mansion windows as Daniel Carter and his niece arranged photographs for the memorial. 3 weeks of restoration had transformed the hidden room from a dusty tomb into a space of remembrance. Malcolm Hughes had insisted on proper humidity controls to preserve the artifacts they'd found, while Amelia had carefully arranged the ceramic toys in a glass display case. "Uncle Daniel, look at this," Amelia called, her small fingers tracing an unusual seam in the wainscoting. The scientist knelt beside her, his analytical mind immediately recognizing the inconsistency in the wood grain. "Good eye," he murmured, pressing gently until he felt a click. A false panel slid open, revealing a small iron chest, its lock green with age. Daniel's heart raced as he carefully extracted the container. "Malcolm should see this before we open it," he said, but curiosity overwhelmed caution. Using restoration tools borrowed from the professor, he delicately worked the ancient mechanism until it surrendered with a reluctant groan. Inside lay a leather-bound volume, Margaret Abernathy's final diary. The pages were brittle, the handwriting increasingly frantic as Daniel turned each leaf. His hands began to tremble as the horrifying truth emerged. "She was trying to help them," he whispered to Amelia, who sat cross-legged beside him. "Margaret created this space to hide children from abuse and neglect, but someone discovered her sanctuary." The diary detailed how Edward Green, Tobias's grandfather, had learned of Margaret's underground orphanage and saw opportunity where she saw salvation. What began as a refuge became a dark enterprise. Children who should have found safety instead vanished into a network of tunnels, sold to wealthy families across state lines. "She tried to stop him," Daniel continued, his voice breaking, "but Edward threatened to expose her as mentally unstable if she spoke out." Amelia's eyes filled with tears. "The children in my dreams." They were real. The scientist's rational mind reeled against the weight of historical betrayal. The Green family's wealth, their position in Savannah society, all built on unspeakable crimes. The same family now fighting to keep the Carter mansion's secrets buried. Daniel's hands shook violently as he closed the diary. The betrayal cut deep, not just by long-dead neighbors, but by a community that had chosen comfortable lies over painful truths for generations. "What do we do now?" Amelia asked, her voice small but steady. Her uncle felt paralyzed by the enormity of what they'd discovered. Then Amelia's warm hand slipped into his, anchoring him to the present. Looking into her determined eyes, Daniel found his resolve. "We remember them," he said firmly. "All of them." Halloween night descended upon Savannah with an eerie intensity. The wind howled through the ancient oak trees surrounding the Carter mansion, their gnarled branches casting dancing shadows across the walls. Daniel Carter and his niece Amelia had spent hours examining the final entries in Margaret's diary, losing track of time in the hidden room behind the mirror. "We should head back, Uncle Daniel. Mom will be worried," Amelia whispered, her small hand clutching her uncle's sleeve. The scientist nodded, closing the weathered journal and rising to his feet. Daniel pressed his palm against the ornate mirror that served as their exit, expecting it to slide open as it had countless times before. The glass remained immovable. He pushed harder, his scientific mind immediately calculating possibilities. Perhaps the mechanism had jammed, or the house had settled. "Let me try," Amelia offered, placing her hands beside his. Together they pushed, but the mirror refused to budge. Then came a sound that sent ice through their veins, a definitive click like a lock engaging, sealing them inside. "Uncle Daniel?" Fear trembled in the child's voice as she backed away from the mirror. In the dim light of their lantern, Daniel saw something that defied rational explanation. The mirror's surface rippled like disturbed water, and within its depths, pale faces appeared, children with hollow eyes and solemn expressions, watching them. "They're here with us," Amelia whispered, her face ashen. "The lost children." Daniel pulled his niece close, wrapping the cotton throw around her shoulders as she trembled against him. The rational part of his brain searched desperately for explanations, while primal fear gripped his heart. "I won't let anything happen to you," he promised, though uncertainty clouded his voice. As the lantern flickered, casting grotesque shadows across the walls, Daniel knelt before Amelia. Tears welled in his eyes, unexpected and raw. "I'm afraid." "Amelia," he confessed, his voice breaking. "Afraid I'll fail you like I failed my brother. We were only 9 when he disappeared. I was supposed to watch him, but I got distracted for just a moment." The confession hung in the air between them, decades of guilt finally given voice. Amelia reached out, touching her uncle's face with gentle fingers. "You were just a child too," she said with wisdom beyond her years. "Like these children were." Something shifted in the atmosphere of the room. The whispers that had haunted the corners fell silent. Daniel and Amelia held each other in the darkness, their shared vulnerability somehow pushing back against the oppressive fear. "We'll remember them," Daniel whispered, understanding dawning. "We'll tell their stories. That's what they've wanted all along." In that moment of connection and truth, their fear transformed into something stronger, a shared resolve that would become their salvation. The darkness seemed to thicken around them as the hours crawled by. Daniel Carter pressed his palm against the sealed mirror, feeling nothing but cold, unyielding glass. Beside him, Amelia huddled under the cotton throw, her small form trembling, not just from the chill that permeated the hidden room. "Uncle Daniel," she whispered, "do you hear them?" He did. The scientist in him wanted to dismiss it as the wind through ancient ventilation shafts or the settling of the mansion's timbers, but the whispers were too distinct, too intentional. Children's voices, some barely audible, others clear as morning bells, filled the space between heartbeats. "We're here," one seemed to say. "Remember us," pleaded another. "Don't leave us in the dark again." Daniel sank to his knees, exhaustion and emotion overwhelming his logical defenses. The lantern flickered, casting elongated shadows across the faded murals. In that moment, he understood what Margaret Abernathy had written in her final diary entries. These children weren't seeking vengeance. They wanted acknowledgement. "I think I know why we're trapped," he said, his voice steadier than he felt. "This house has held its secrets for nearly a century. The children who disappeared, they were erased twice. First in life, then from memory." Amelia nodded, her eyes reflecting wisdom beyond her years. "They just want someone to know they existed." Daniel rose slowly, addressing the empty air with the reverence of a prayer. "I promise you," he began, his words gathering strength, "we will remember you. Every name in Margaret's records, every child who passed through these walls, you will be honored. Your stories will be told." He thought of his own missing twin, of the hollow space that loss had carved inside him. "No one deserves to be forgotten," he continued. "Not you, not anyone who suffered here." As he spoke, something shifted in the atmosphere. The oppressive weight lifted slightly. Amelia gasped, pointing toward the mirror. "Look!" The glass surface rippled like disturbed water. The whispers grew louder, then harmonized into a collective sigh that seemed to exhale from the very walls. Before their astonished eyes, the mirror shimmered once more, and with a gentle click, the hidden door swung open. Freedom beckoned from beyond the threshold. Amelia rushed forward, then paused, turning back to the room with unexpected hesitation. "We'll come back," she promised the empty air. "We'll make sure everyone knows about you." Daniel placed his hand on his niece's shoulder, feeling the burden of their promise settle between them. As they stepped through the doorway, he knew their ordeal had transformed into something greater than fear. It had become a sacred trust. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall windows of the Carter mansion, casting golden patterns across the polished wooden floors. Daniel Carter stood at the entrance of the once hidden room, now transformed into a solemn yet beautiful memorial. The scientist's hands trembled slightly as he cut the ceremonial ribbon, officially opening the space to the public for the first time. "Today we remember," he announced, his voice steady despite the emotion behind his words. Malcolm Hughes moved through the gathered crowd, explaining the historical significance of each artifact they'd discovered. The professor handled the ceramic toys with reverence, sharing the stories they'd pieced together about their young owners. Nearby, Caleb Freeman guided visitors through the exhibit he'd helped design, his eyes occasionally finding Amelia's across the room. The local press, who had initially dismissed their discoveries as sensationalism, now captured every moment. Photographers documented the memorial, while reporters interviewed attendees, their skepticism replaced by genuine interest in the children's forgotten stories. Neighbors arrived throughout the morning, bringing traditional offerings. Elderly women carried plates of warm cornbread, while fishermen contributed freshly caught crab. Young girls wove delicate jasmine garlands that perfumed the air, their sweet scent mingling with the room's lingering cedar. Lucy Carter greeted each visitor with quiet dignity. Though still protective of her daughter, she had made peace with the mansion's past. The mother watched proudly as Amelia shared her experiences with curious listeners, no longer afraid of what she had witnessed. "The children just wanted to be remembered," Amelia explained to a group of wide-eyed visitors. "They didn't want to be forgotten." In the center of the room, the ornate mirror stood as a testament to discovery rather than concealment. Amelia approached it slowly, studying her reflection. Where once she had seen ghostly faces superimposed over her own, now she saw only herself, whole, unafraid, and stronger for what she had endured. Daniel gathered everyone's attention as he addressed the crowd. "This memorial doesn't erase the pain of the past," he said, his voice carrying to every corner of the room, "but it ensures that these children's stories belong to all of us now. Their memory lives in Savannah's heart." Tobias Green stood at the back, his expression unreadable. Though the Green family had opposed the memorial, even he seemed moved by the community's response. The patriarch nodded once toward Daniel before slipping away. As the afternoon progressed, the hidden room, hidden no more, filled with light, conversation, and remembrance. The pain had not vanished, but in sharing it the burden had lightened, spread across many shoulders instead of weighing down a few. November brought a crisp chill to Savannah, painting the trees in amber and gold as frost delicately traced patterns across the Carter mansion's windows each morning. Inside, however, warmth radiated from every corner. The once forbidding, hidden room had transformed into a memorial that drew visitors from across the city and beyond. Daniel Carter stood by the ornate mirror, now permanently secured in its open position, watching as a group of schoolchildren placed handmade paper flowers beneath the wall where names of the forgotten children had been carefully inscribed. His scientific mind still occasionally questioned the events of the past months, but his heart knew the truth that logic couldn't explain. "They're smiling now," Amelia whispered, slipping her small hand into his. The young girl had developed a quiet confidence since their ordeal, her nightmares replaced by peaceful dreams. "I can feel it." Lucy approached them, carrying a tray of cornbread and hot cider for the visitors. Her initial fear had transformed into a fierce pride in what her family had accomplished. "The Green family sent a representative today," she murmured to her brother, "and not Tobias himself, of course, but his daughter came with jasmine garlands." "Progress comes slowly in Savannah," Daniel replied with a gentle smile. "But it comes." Malcolm Hughes guided another tour through the tunnel entrance, his voice carrying with scholarly enthusiasm as he explained the historical significance of the orphanage network. The professor had published a thoughtful paper on the mansion's secrets, carefully balancing historical accuracy with respect for the lost children. In the corner, Caleb Freeman was installing a stained glass window that caught the afternoon light, casting rainbow shadows across the wooden floor. The young man had found his true calling in restoration art after losing his apprenticeship, and his friendship with Amelia had blossomed into a bond that helped them both heal. "Do you think we'll ever know all their stories?" Amelia asked, tracing her fingers along the diary displayed in a protective case. "Some secrets stay secrets," Daniel answered honestly, "but remembering matters more than knowing everything." That evening, as the last visitors departed, the three Carters walked the halls together, their footsteps echoing in comfortable unison. The mansion no longer felt haunted but hallowed, a place where past and present coexisted in respectful harmony. Behind the mirror, the door remained forever open, a testament to courage and truth. Sometimes, in the quietest moments, Daniel thought he heard children's laughter, not fearful or trapped, but free and joyful, like the sound of a long-awaited homecoming. The Carter mansion had become what Margaret Abernathy had always intended, a sanctuary where no child would ever be forgotten again.